But we're going to start today's show with having a quick look at the news. Nick Ferrari is still in the studio. Morning, Nick. Thank you for joining us. And Alison Phillips is here live with us.
Yes, but we'd like to start by taking a moment to send our heartfelt condolences to the friends and families of Jamie and Fingal Greenlaw-Meek, who tragically lost their lives in the Air India crash on Thursday.
Yeah, as more details continue to emerge from the devastating tragedy, their loved ones have asked us to share a statement on their behalf. It is with profound sadness and unimaginable heartbreak that we confirm that both Jamie and Fingal were passengers on the Air India flight that has tragically crashed in India.
They were a bright light in so many of our lives, deeply loved as sons, brothers and friends. Their warmth, kindness, humour and generous spirits touched everyone who knew them. We are all beyond devastated by the news and are struggling to come to terms with the potential of a life without them.
They would want us to spread positive energy to the world, especially at this time. May peace and love prevail. Where there is darkness, spread light, love and laughter. We were lucky enough to spend some time with both of them. Fingal on the show, of course, Jamie behind the scenes.
Just absolutely charming gentlemen who were so positive. I've still got my Palo Santo that he gave me and my rosemary that I burned.
When Fingal came in last time, he left us with a little care package, didn't he?
Yeah.
And I've got the stuff that to cleanse the energy in my room, some grounding stones, a little bell to ting and some spritz. And when we heard the news, obviously it was heartbreaking that those lives of these two young men that were so full of joy and wonderful, wonderful souls have been tragically lost. They will be really sorely missed and very, very warmly remembered by all of their friends and family, of course. And it comes, Alison, on the backdrop of the other families of British victims in the air crash, saying that the Foreign Office aren't doing enough to help them with regards to trying to get their loved ones back to the UK.
It is, and it's such a terrible tragedy, and those words there from the families of Fingal and Jamie just express that loss. And so we must remember there are the families of 52 people that were killed, British people alone that were killed in that terrible, terrible tragedy last Thursday. And so now there's some family of the three, the mum, dad and the little child from Gloucester, who also died in the disaster, are saying they don't feel they've had enough support from the British government as they're out there and they're trying to get the bodies because obviously they want to have a funeral, they want to sort of pay due respect to them. And I think whilst the government has ensured that there are sort of forensic investigators have been sent out there that are helping the Indian police on the ground with the investigation, where there is a sense that hasn't been as much support is around kind of the compassion and the support for families that are kind of really trying to find their loved ones, trying to work through kind of the bureaucracy, and you can imagine the confusion on the ground.
Nick, it's such a difficult time for these families trying to come to terms with the extraordinary tragedy, as Alison says, and when they just need support and help and as much information and contact from the government as possible, it feels like they're sort of having to reach out to say, look, we need more help.
You're absolutely right. And obviously I want to extend my condolences to Jamie and Fingal's family and pay tribute to that tribute, which I found very moving. But you know what, Ben? I want to speak to Alison as sort of journalist to journalist, because we've just concluded this conversation on my LBC show. 52 Britons have lost their lives here, Alison, but it doesn't feel like it in the newspapers. There's something... Now, I know it's and you'll know better than I, you've edited, it's a foreign story, so it's not... God forbid the accident had happened at Gatwick, that would make it bigger, but it's the biggest loss of British lives since 9/11. The government stands accused of not doing enough. The Foreign Office says that they're working around the clock. I don't know that the media, radio, newspapers, I don't know we've done enough, Alison. Do you know what I'm saying? It doesn't feel like 52 Brits have lost their lives. Alison?
I thought exactly the same thing this morning. I don't think it's even on any of the front pages this morning, is it?
No, it's not.
So where are we now? Tuesday, so the 4 days on. If this had happened, obviously if this had happened here, it would have been the front page for weeks. If it had happened in Europe, I think it would have been the front page for several weeks. And I think it's desperately sad that it seems to be sort of slid from view so soon. I think on the first day there was an awful lot of attention, but it does seem to be sliding from view. And of course, as a consequence of that maybe it doesn't get the political attention that it needs if it's not been covered fully in the media.
And so from the family's perspective, Nick, you can understand their frustration as well, because they want this to stay present in everybody's minds so they can get the support and they can get their loved ones back.
Well, we're hearing horror stories, which I won't go into detail because it's not appropriate for your audience, but there are efforts to try and identify some of the victims, let's put it like that. And there's really, the families say, there is virtually zero help or support coming from the British government. Well, That's not good enough. Apparently, we've sent a team that's going to investigate what caused the accident. And again, Alison, I think, will concur. Had this been a terror attack, that would have meant that it would have been on the front pages more. It seems almost certainly a catastrophic engine failure. No one is suggesting it's terror. But we are not, I mean, the families are saying we are simply not helping them enough. And if we have abandoned them, and a bit the media abandoned them, I really do think it's a call to action. Yeah. And as Alison rightly says, of course, we've had the escalation of the Middle East conflict, which quite rightly takes a lot of the front pages. Quite rightly, the Prime Minister needs to address that. But let's not forget, we've got 52 Brits out there, or families, I'm so sorry, the families of 52 who we need to help, and we're not helping.
Yeah. Let's talk about our second story this morning, that the government is proposing tougher sentencing laws that would give prison officers the power to use force if convicted criminals refuse to appear in court. What do you know about this, Nick?
Well, this follows the idea, unfortunately, a series of measures, because there have been some fairly high-profile cases where those who have been found guilty have not attended. Now, it does seem you have what are called victims' impact statements, and you've had high-profile killers, including Thomas Cashman, who murdered Olivia Pratt-Corbell in 2022, the mother saying that he should have been brought up there. And I won't identify the Southport killer. We all know the man of whom I speak. To me, it seems wrong. Now, speak to judges as I have, and there is something, as I'm sure you're aware, called the sanctity of the court. It has to be a very austere place. Yep. If someone comes in and just wants to disrupt, shouts vile or abusive language at the family or the judge or the barrister or the counsel, then the magnitude of sentencing, bear in mind, this is only upon conviction, all right? So let's say it's he. He is found guilty. I believe he should be there for sentencing. I believe too many people are taking the coward's way out by refusing to attend. But we have got to be aware, some of these people are so sick, so depraved. The moment that a family gets a bit of closure is possibly going to be disrupted by screaming and shouting. So do we gag them? It's very difficult. That's the way possibly that this legislation, if it gets approval, of course, would seek to go.
I think the Conservatives are coming forward with even tougher ideas of gags and shackles and bits and pieces. Robert Jenrick saying criminals must be made to face up to their actions, and here the pain they cause is a slap in the face for the victims when they refuse. Our amendments would give officers much stronger powers to compel cowardly criminals to appear and get victims proper justice. I wonder what you've made of the idea of gagging them and shackling them and forcing them to stand there, Alison.
Yeah, I mean, well, in the past I've said that they should be dragged by their bleeding fingernails into the dock, because I think when you've been through a personal tragedy, you want to see justice done. However, I think when you, like Nick says, when you speak to people that work in the courts, in the police, they will say that the distress that could be caused to families if somebody does come in and is causing a real scene could be even worse. However, I think this has become a trend. This didn't used to be a thing that people refused to go into the dock for sentencing. It's become a trend, and that other people are seeing, perpetrators are seeing other people doing it, thinking, well, I'm not going to go either. So that's got to stop. So the government is bringing in this legislation which would make it much harder. And they're already... So some of the language Robert Jenrick is using in a very Robert Jenrick kind of way is to inflame things. When it says shackled, they're already quite often on handcuffs anyway. So that's not a thing. The gagging thing, I think, is probably completely out of the question. And so I think what we'll end up with is a situation whereby people will be brought into court, and 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be screaming and shouting. That's just not going to happen, because once they're in the court environment, they actually behave themselves, because they're generally quite pathetic characters that are overwhelmed by that moment. So I don't think we're going to need to have people being gagged, but I do think we need to get people in that dock.
I think one of the interesting things in this case is often to listen to the families of the victims. Yeah. And Cheryl Corbell, who's the mother of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was killed, and her... and the person that perpetrated that didn't come for his sentencing. She wants that to be the case, that they are brought forward, and still understands, even though there could be noise made by those perpetrators in the court, the family should be given, she says, the choice to have them there or not, whether it is going to be distressing. So the families of the victims can choose whether they want them to be there if they think there's going to be disruption. And that feels, Nick, like a really important part of this process, that the families are consulted as to what they would rather see happen.
Difficult to argue with that, isn't it, Ben? If this vile individual has taken away a life, or in the other case we mentioned has taken away a series of lives, and if the relatives, the mums, the dads, whatever it might be, if they're, to Alison's perfectly correct point, it is going to be a very small number of cases where they kick off. But if the family, who are coming to terms with losing all the instances we've just mentioned, by the way, young children, if the families are ready, if there is a bit of abuse, if they do get shouted at, I don't see that anyone can stand in the way of that request.
Because the whole purpose of them being there to listen to the victim impact statement is to hope that on some level it gets through to them the enormity of what they've done, and that actually is part of their kind of punishment, but also their rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Martin is over there as well. They're all going to be joining in as we look through some of today's top news stories. I'm sure you were discussing this on the radio this morning, Nick. This report from Baroness Casey into the child sex abuse and grooming gangs has found a culture of denial, lack of cooperation between the authorities, flawed data, let too many victims down. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, was talking about this in the Commons yesterday. This is what she said.
Earlier this year, I also commissioned Baroness Louise Casey to undertake a rapid national audit of the nature, scale and characteristics of gang-based exploitation. The findings of her audit are damning. In the local data that the audit examined from 3 police forces, they identify clear evidence of over-representation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men, and she refers to examples of organisations avoiding the topic altogether for fear of appearing racist or raising community tensions.
I wonder what the reaction from your listeners was this morning.
Anger. So those 3 forces are Greater Manchester, South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire. This is the unpalatable, unacceptable and, one has to say, largely unreported truth of what went on in these areas. Let's pause for a moment and praise the great work of the newspaper The Times. And they recently lost their former chief investigative reporter, Andrew Norfolk, who only died within the last month or so. He was the man who blew the whistle. He carried on in the face of all sorts of objections and problems. And Maggie Oliver, who's still with us, I'm delighted to say, the Greater Manchester police officer who actually resigned in fury over this. What we know now is that there was a cover-up of extraordinary proportions involving local authorities, local health agencies and police officers. And it would appear that they did not want to take action in a case of many men, mostly of Pakistani origin, who were grooming, torturing, raping and possibly even murdering girls as young as 10. And there was a fear that they would be branded racist if they took action. It's about as dark as you can get in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Alison, have we got to that point where the authorities are more scared of being seen as racist than protecting children who are being raped and abused and groomed?
Well, I think certainly the initial findings we got from Baroness Casey would indicate that that is kind of where we've got to. And yes, it was the police, but it was also sort of slightly broader than that. It was like local authorities. It was how much was known centrally. It was like really an entire establishment cover-up of what had been going on. And there's some interesting things that Baroness Casey comes to. A lot of it is about recording the data, because if you haven't got the evidence to show that these particular crimes are being done by these particular people, there's never enough kind of evidence to make the case for sort of further investigation and inquiry. And there was a lot of pushback against sort of having a further inquiry because they said, well, we've already had inquiries. But the point was, we've had inquiries, recommendations haven't been implemented, and we're still in this situation.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that things move forward dramatically from here.
And quickly.
That's what campaigners want quickly. I'm not knocking other inquiries, but they sometimes go on for year after year. We need quick results in this one.
OK, what about salaries? Should the government currently it's weighing up whether to force companies to reveal salary details in a move to close the gender and racial pay gap?
I think this is a good idea. So, because as eyes lifted to heaven, what we know is that quite often, what we know first of all is there is still a gender pay gap. So men are getting paid more than women. Now, there's all sorts of different reasons for that, but until you've got transparency and you understand what's really going on, it's very hard to do anything about it. My first thing will always say, pay equals power. So the people that get paid the most have the most power in an organisation. So if you've got men with getting the highest salaries across the board, they're the ones that hold the power. Now, there are reasons why sometimes in individual cases people are being paid differently. So what's the harm in understanding what the differences are, and everyone can make a decision on whether it's a good thing or not?
I know you're itching to get in on this, and we will come to you, but I'm intrigued to see what Martin would have to say about this, of course, Martin, because this is your field, isn't it, really? Business and understanding finances.
Well, it's not my specialty, but I remember writing when I first wrote a book 20 years ago, writing about in one of my first jobs. I was doing quite well in the job. I think I was on about £22,000 a year at the time, and a new guy came and he was put on my team, put underneath me. He was older, he was more experienced, but he was working on my team. And after After about 3 months, we ended up discovering what each other earned, and I was on 22 grand and he was on 50 grand. And I went to the bosses and I said, hold on, he's on my team. Why is he paid more? They said, he's got a lot more experience than you. And I said, well, then he should be running the bloody team, shouldn't he? Forgive my language, right? Or I should be paid a lot more. And actually, that was hugely empowering. So I've long talked about how talking about money, we don't do it enough. We don't ask our neighbours what they pay for their fence. We don't ask people what they did for their roof, because once you start to understand what other people are doing and paying, we start to empower each other. Now, these specific proposals, I think they have the balance right. What they're actually saying is there's a proposal that you would be told what other people in similar or the same roles are being paid. It's not about an automatic transparency right the way through the board. But I do think that is important. And on the gender pay gap, well, when I was in charge and before I sold Money Saving Expert, when I used to run it, I would always remember every time we did a pay review, my male staff would come to me and try and push for it to be higher, and my female staff wouldn't. And you end up getting a pay gap from that. And maybe this type of transparency that says, well, hold on, someone else is pushing, you're not pushing. Yeah. That is all empowering. Nick? It's empowering.
Look, you've run newsrooms, I've run newsrooms. How are you going to tell the political editor that she isn't making as much as the crime editor and the health editor's making more than all of them? That is the problem you're going to have. They're all editors for their little departments. What are you going to tell them?
But what, you just tell them the truth? You just sort of...
So the crime editor's making 20 grand a year more, like the example we've just heard from Martin. He or she is going to be mega hacked off.
But maybe most big companies now are already having, when you apply for jobs, say the salary is going to be between X and Y, and so people know what they're getting into. And it's just going to be more on that. If you're an editor of a particular section, you're going to be earning between A amount and B amount.
You've never sanctioned someone paying a little bit more in an area that you will have done that. We've all done that when we've run that.
And also,
and
do you know why
please God, don't let anyone find out.
Why quite often that is because somebody goes on and on and on about it, generally a man. And so quite often, men have ended up getting paid better than women in certain situations.
So if you ask the question for long enough and ask for more money, you get it.
But that does work.
Just wear them down.
How do you think I ever paid for my house?
this is what we've got to do, chaps.
That's empowering. Thanks for visiting our This Morning YouTube channel. We upload tons of new content every single day. So hit the subscribe button, like all the videos, and don't miss out. We'll see you in the morning.